Hey folks, welcome back to Prairietown Dreaming. This is the third and final segment of the series because if you're interested in learning more about getting yourself over here, I'm going to ask you to get in touch. We're starting to pull together a physical meetup for the fall, and we'll have some online content that we'll share just with people who are especially interested in the region associated with that meetup. You'll find the link to get on those lists in the video description. In this series, my husband and I have been sharing about the culture of the Prairie Pothole region, as well as its unique strengths as a resilient landscape. The landscape and ecosystems here, they're adapted to fire, extreme cold, extreme heat, and intense wind. I think that if you're a person who's serious about biodiversity preservation, the Prairie Pothole region is a place where your eyes ought to be. The question, of course, is if you can imagine being here yourself in a part of the country that is not in any way a tourist destination and where a fairly high number of pioneers had to go back east because the winds drove them mad. Here still do drive people mad, by the way, and I want to make a distinction between other parts of the country that do have high and persistent winds. Prairie Pothole region is not the only part of the country with high, persistent, strong winds. Prairie Pothole region is the only part of the country where you regularly hear that the winds drive people insane. People who have settled here multi-generationally were fairly resilient to that, but there is still a fair amount of outflow of people who don't make it past their first winter because the winds make them go mad. Worth considering. Additional potential strength to the region? I don't know. Conditions here are already highly variable, and some might say highly terrible. Some people love it here, like me. We have a lot of old people here because many of us in Iowa, we express our love for Iowa by wanting to die here. Our old people, they don't want to die in Florida. They want to stay here and die with us. In the local paper, there are always pictures of people celebrating their 90th and 100th birthdays, and these are big community celebrations. Might not shock you, those pictures of old people are by and large pictures of old white people. You can see on this map here, the Prairie Pothole region is one of the whitest parts of the country. It is chock full of white people. In the second video of the series, I talked some about bodily autonomy, which many people said was important to them as they thought about where they could imagine living. Another type of question was about race. And if this here in the Prairie Pothole region was an area where you'd want to move if you were a person of color, or if you like being around people of color, or if you ever maybe want to eat food that has a flavor again. There was another type of question people didn't ask, which I think is very important, which is about the economy of the region and economic opportunities in the region. And I think those stories are very connected, race and economy. And when we're talking about discrimination, I say, as a member of a minority group that has historically experienced discrimination, as a Jewish person, I think one of the most important things to look for is economic opportunity. When we look at groups being pushed down in American history, when we look at pictures that say Irish not welcome, when we confront the lie of separate but equal education in the South under segregation, when we consider the treatment of Americans of Japanese descent during World War II, the shameful divestment they experienced of their property and assets, in all three of those stories, we see folks being cut off from opportunity. Many people in minority groups moderately okay with people hating us. I mean, we know that they hate us because they ain't us. We can focus on liking ourselves. It's not a big deal. But we worry about violence and we worry about being cut off from educational and economic opportunity. That's the lens I think we need to bring to this discussion of the region. Is there violence? And is there economic opportunity for all people? Let's explore. Is there violence? No, not a lot of violence. Let's look back in history. The history of racial violence in America is painful. You can see that in Prairie Pothole region, Minnesota, we have 3 reported lynchings, South Dakota, and 1. There's no record of anyone ever being lynched in Iowa. In Iowa, there's a lot of pride in our Civil War history. You see occasionally some moron flying a Confederate flag in Iowa, and you hear plenty of people having very quiet Iowa type conversations about how dumb they are and how many boys died from their own family back in the war. Iowa sent the most troops per capita to fight in the Civil War, and many folks say their family tradition is that that was because of their desire to fight the evils of slavery. A lot of people here in the region today still hate slavery with a passion that is sadly absent in today's world. They hate slavery and they hate all the evil forms of slavery. One of those forms is reflected in income inequality. Here's a nice map about income inequality from Business Insider. Check it out. In the continental US, our income inequality ratings are as good as it gets. They're not bad in South Dakota or Minnesota, but Iowa's income inequality is really low. If you need to be around ladies who are getting BBLs, Iowa's not the place for you. We pioneered normcore, but for us, it's not a fashion, it's a way of life. A lot of people here don't want to have too much because there's an awareness that when you have too much, that is taken away from other people. There are a lot of things that are different here. I think there are a lot of things the dominant culture can be proud of here in Iowa. Make it about race. Let's talk about white people here. Let's slip into old language for just a minute because I'm talking about race and history for just a minute here. The white people here fought the federal government on the behalf of the Indians. The whites of Iowa fought that the federal government couldn't take Indian children away to the Indian schools. They fought, and the argument made was that those schools are bad, that those schools were bad, and that they wouldn't send their children away to schools like that either. The argument made by the whites of Iowa was that all parents have the right to care for and make decisions about their children. I think that's an important story about the historical values of the whites of Iowa. If we're going to talk about race, is white history complex? Yes. Is it all good? No. Also, it's history. We can learn from it, but we're building a future. The only dual language signs in Iowa are on the highways by the Meskwaki settlement. I personally have a great admiration for the way the Meskwaki have tended their settlement lands. Those lands are radiant in their biodiversity. We got to build a future. As a Jew, speaking out of that minority experience, we within that community struggle with this, with the duality between the memory of horror, of thousands of years of horror, and the possibility of building a good and just future. We need memory. We can't afford to forget, and we're commanded to remember. But we also need to be able to imagine a world that could be different, a world that could be better. Back to the Prairie Pothole region. According to belonging at berkeley.edu, we are the least segregated region in the country, but we do see big income inequality. You can see this map by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. We're not looking so hot here. I think some people might look at this map and see evidence of systemic racism, and that's a valid lens, but it's not the only lens through which we can interpret this information. There are a lot of people of color who are coming to Iowa now. A picture of the first couple of generations of any migration pattern. The new folks tend not to have the wealth of the established population. And that last map that looked at income inequality between Black and white people, which is important, but it's worth noting when we talk about racial issues, there are a lot more types of folks in the mix there. There are a lot of people of color coming to Iowa now who are raising their children here. I got to go to a party this last weekend with one of the most wonderful types of people you can find at a party, a young lady named America. Her mom works hard. Her parents came up to the US from Mexico. She was born here, and her parents named her America. They named her America as a celebration of America as a land of opportunity. I'm going to say some things now. They're just about my part of the Prairie Pothole region because I have a decade of experience here. I never lived in Minnesota or South Dakota. There are many working class jobs available in Iowa. There's affordable housing in Iowa where you can get a house and keep up your house with a working class job. There's Medicaid expansion to help people get access to health care, and most people in the healthcare system don't treat people on Medicaid poorly. Access to doctors, dentists, and vision care for children in Iowa is especially good still. Even if you, the parent, can't get assistance, the odds are extremely good your kids will be able to get the care they need to grow up healthy in Iowa. It's hard to find childcare in Iowa. This is one of the few remaining states where a lot of folks will assume that a woman with young children does not also work outside the home. Caring for her children is seen as important work. This cultural element, I think it's not a bad thing. It's worth noting there are many more stay-at-home dads now than there were even 10 years ago, like a five-fold increase in families where the father is staying home. I think it's good for families to be able to afford a parent to stay home with little children. But the childcare situation for families where both parents want to or need to work is hard here. Childcare is hard to find and it's expensive. A working class family can get a job and a house and healthcare in Iowa, no matter what color they are. If you're a person in a minority group, you can't expect to run into some weird questions from people in Iowa, and some of these weird questions are quite ignorant. I know other Jews who have been asked quite seriously if they have horns. No one asks me that because I'm obviously horn free, but I've had people ask me a lot of other questions that I could have taken offense to. I don't feel a lot of need to take offense. I'm sure that in my life, I've asked some ignorant questions that were well intended. Is the Prairie Pothole region a post racial paradise? No. Is the Prairie Pothole region a safe place to exist as a minority? Yes. I would say definitely yes. And it's a place with economic opportunity for working class people. I can only tell you from my experiences the past 13 years. Let's bring Mike in. He's got some decades of Iowa experience on me, and his family's been in the region uninterrupted for 8 generations.
Okay.
All right, so are you concerned about your wardrobe?
A little bit.
So Mike is here looking at himself, saying that he's upset because he wanted to wear his Lee Snick Offerman shirt. But I know the Swanson energy is what people love about you, Mike.
Yeah, and
It's
even this shirt, I think it's still bringing a little bit of Nick Offerman.
You look like you're going to a party where everyone only gets 2 pieces of pizza.
Oh no.
You're cute.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just making jokes. But okay, seriously though, on the Ron Swanson thing, when I said, Mike, will you talk with me about race and inequality in Iowa? Your advice was that people should make sure that they move to a town with no police.
Okay, yes. Let me specify what that means. So your big cities in Iowa, they all have police departments, obviously, right?
Like normal.
Yeah, like Des Moines, Cedar Rapids Police Department.
They're like a normal human place where people live, not
Yes.
like our place.
We live in a town of 90 people, no police department here, not surprisingly.
We answer to the EPA alone
Well, and the county sheriff.
and the DNR.
Yes, yes. And the mid-sized towns, that's where you get some variation. Some mid-sized towns have police departments, some just rely on the county sheriff. And the ones that rely on the county sheriff, a lot chiller, a lot more like relaxed. The very small town police, they don't have a lot to do. Nearby, I'm not going to name any names, but they were arresting people for picking asparagus last year.
The crime of picking asparagus should absolutely go unpunished. It's very offensive.
Yes.
No police is important to your lawless paradise in the Prairie Pothole region.
If there's an actual crime happening, the county sheriff will come out. But
it's true. It's true. The county sheriff can take care of it. But it's like one of the big problems in a lot of the country that relates so deeply to racism and inequality is police violence. You can get yourself in Iowa to a place where our emergency services are so understaffed that there is no police department. It's fantastic.
But we're all okay. Like everything's fine. It's not a
what picks my asparagus? All right, so there was a crime here recently that I want to tell the story of. Remember when the tractor crime happened?
The tractor crime.
This is a crime where someone called the county sheriff because someone in the night had taken their tractor and had plowed their own field with the tractor and then put it back. And they knew this had happened because the tractor was dirty and there wasn't any gas in it. And the sheriff did not investigate this as a crime.
Eventually, the sheriff came out, but had to really be talked into it because he said, the tractor's back.
Tractor's okay.
There's no crime.
Yeah, the tractor wasn't harmed in the plowing of this field. These are the sort of crimes where people could get shot other places.
Right. I mean, like
the tractor was okay.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility you get shot in Iowa stealing someone's tractor.
It's true, but you deserve it because you were stealing someone's tractor. I feel like there's a distinction to be made there.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yes.
Only shoot for the leg in the case of tractor crimes. That's a kill shot.
I don't know that I can back that up.
It's like a person who's been in Iowa for multi-generations. That tells you how seriously they take tractor crimes. It's very scary. They're a little scary here in this place where the winds drive you mad.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
You wanted to talk about my Iowa journey though, in a very literal sense.
Yes.
Okay, so we have mentioned my 8th generation Iowa ties. I was not born in Iowa. My parents left to seek opportunities elsewhere. My dad was in the Navy, and so I was born in California. And I spent my first 10 years on the West Coast. And then they came home to Iowa. It was home for them. It wasn't necessarily home for me, but I spent my junior high school years here. And you know, my extended family is all here. At the time, it was very evident. It was obvious to everyone that you're going to seek opportunities and they're going to be elsewhere. You're going to go off to college. You're going to go somewhere Maybe you'll go East Coast, maybe you'll go West Coast, but the point is you're going to leave. And all my friends left. Everyone left Iowa.
This is very common. You know, in our generation, there's been huge brain drain in Iowa.
Yes,
I
yes.
talk about the availability of working class jobs. If you want a job that's not a working class job, the economic landscape is much tighter, much smaller niches. You got to be able to start a business, really.
It's very different, and it's continuing to change now that we're in more of an information age, and like we have the fastest internet here that we've ever had, much faster than what we had in Chicago.
We got fiber internet that has been drilled to our house by a man with this robot, and he was the happiest man ever because I wanted to know how the robot worked, and he wanted to tell me. That was a great day.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was a happy day.
So my point is, I am the second generation of my family to leave Iowa and come back to Iowa. We leave in our 20s to go seek out other opportunities, other adventures, and something brings us back. There is a draw home, and I know a lot of people who are looking for the same thing. I have a lot of friends who left and came back. I have a lot of friends who would like to come back. They talk about coming back. They're sort of scattered to the winds. But a lot of it is just based on the economics and the way people move, the way populations shift. There's no um, big city in Iowa. If you look on a map of the Midwest, you've got cities that are sort of big enough to draw young people to them. In Chicago, obviously, Minneapolis, Kansas City to some extent.
That's smart. Young people who are going up to the Twins up by Minneapolis, St. Paul, that's a good destination for young people who want an urban environment.
And people, in my experience, the young people who move to Des Moines are almost exclusively from the small towns in Iowa. And then they buy a house in Des Moines, have kids, and their kids leave and go to Chicago or New York or LA or something like that. That's my family story. My parents are from a smaller town outside of Des Moines. And these patterns, um, they've been going for a few generations now, and you've seen the small towns sort of hollow out. But it has been, I think you could say it's been a soft landing for a lot of the small towns. They haven't completely cratered.
So the small towns that are still going are some of the most resilient communities that I have experienced in the United States. There are places that have managed to make strong local economies. There are places that have a strong local culture. And a lot of them, it is a healthy, welcoming culture. A culture where you don't even have to have a police department because the county sheriff can take care of the situations that are going on. There is a lot of housing stock in these rural Iowa towns that needs some work, but it's not like as decrepit and horrible as the New York Times would like you to say. But who are they to talk about decrepit real estate? The real estate in New York City is terrible. Take that, New York
Yeah.
Times. I'm
Take
sure they're
that.
listening.
Yes, I'm sure.
Never mind. All right. Sorry about this. Sorry about this diversion. But when you're looking at places to go, places where there's a culture of welcoming, especially in Western Iowa, which I think was more seriously hollowed in some
Yeah,
ways than
yeah.
Eastern Iowa. There are a lot of towns that are making these very like ham-fisted, awkward but genuine attempts to attract Hispanic families,
Mhm.
where they're like, Iowa, we ate a taco and it turns out that you can put pork in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Encountered this other culture and it's full of people who share their values and it's full of people who really celebrate the value of family and that they like it.
Mhm.
But like I said in the first part of the video about awkward questions, there's not a lot of language to talk about these things in the culture here.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. And the conversations about race, it always gets tricky. Iowa was settled as a explicitly whites only state. I mean, that was the whole settlement plan. That was there was an attempt to sort of circumvent a lot of racial disharmony by just not having different races mixed together.
And as we talk about the settlement pattern, that makes it sound a lot more peaceful and agreeable than it was. We're talking about the violence of conquest and tremendous violence to the landscape. If you want to think about what state does the landscape look more different than pre-conquest,
Mm,
Iowa might be number one because Iowa was a lot of wetland and now it is not. All the wetland is vanished.
right, right. Yeah, but as the sort of immigration patterns have shifted in America, in up until the 1970s, it was very hard for someone from Asia or Africa or Latin America to move to the United States. It was only then that you see a shift in immigration quotas, immigration patterns. And so the large waves of immigration that have come into the US and really changed the racial dynamic of the US happened at a time when there just wasn't a lot of economic vitality in Iowa. There wasn't a lot that was drawing new populations to the state.
It used to be hard to get into the US. There's evidence that my family got into the US under what we might call a false presumption of whiteness. Although I did, we married white people. You can see I clearly have white heritage through my mother's side. We're genuinely white.
And you've continued marrying white people.
It's true. I think that when we look at settlement patterns in America, we saw a time of exclusion that meant that Iowa became really whites only.
Mhm.
It's got the winds that drive people nuts.
Yes.
That makes people not want to come here for obvious reasons. Then, once we start to get more people of color emigrating to America, we came in during this time where Iowa really didn't have a lot of economic opportunity and where we were very devastated by the meth crisis.
Oh, yes.
The meth crisis remains a serious demographic force in Iowa. Small towns that are resilient and survive hate meth, and you should not consider bringing drugs into these areas. It's very serious. There's a strong social stigma, and it matters.
Oh, yes.
But at this time, if you want to come into Iowa, if people of color want to come into Iowa, there is opportunity. There are already people who are part of a wave of people of color coming into Iowa, and there are many communities that are actively welcoming people of color to Iowa.
Yes, yes. And I would say, unlike maybe some other places, although maybe I shouldn't talk about other places, I'll just say, unlike maybe some expectations, it's not just the big cities that these people are moving to. There are many small towns in Iowa that are, 15, 20% Latino.
And growing.
And growing. Yes, yes. Often it's related to agricultural work and this sort of thing. If you're looking for a small town, if you're looking for a small town experience, if you don't want to move to the United States or move to Iowa just to end up in what counts as the big city here, there are opportunities. There are ways to do that, and you shouldn't feel like the country lifestyle, the small town lifestyle, is closed to people based on race. I don't think that's true.
There are some rural areas where it can be very difficult or dangerous to move if you're a person of color. I don't think that that's true in Iowa. And I do see many people of color kind of scattered through rural communities.
Mhm.
My children from my first marriage, they're children of color, and they are not the only children of color at our school,
Right, right.
at our
Yeah.
public school.
Yeah, our public school district, which is it's geographically very large, but it's very small towns. And I thought they would be the only non-white kids when we moved here, but it turns out they aren't. There are quite a few actually.
There's enough kids to have a community. There's enough kids that if your children are children of color, they'll be able to have a community of other children of color to be part of their larger community at basically any public school that I have visited in the state of Iowa. And I think that that's an important thing to note. I think it's also important to note that this is a state that is extremely business friendly. The regulations around setting up and running a business, whether a for-profit or a nonprofit business, are not onerous. You don't need to hire a lawyer for things that you would need to hire a lawyer for in, say, New York State. The state provides a lot of assistance, and I find it to be genuinely very friendly
Mhm.
for people who are working to start businesses. They want people to be able to grow the landscape of opportunity here.
Yeah, and there are a lot of growth industries based around catering to these new populations. There are grocery stores that cater to Latinos. There are, you know, restaurants that are opening in much smaller towns than you would expect, where they're serving, you know, authentic regional Mexican cuisine, that sort of thing.
I just started seeing in the last 3 years our first stores with West African grocery focus.
Yeah, yeah, I saw
There's a
that.
lot more West African goods. I know there's a specialty Filipino grocery store up in Cedar Rapids.
Right.
There are a wide variety of stores that can help you get flavor into Iowa, which we know has driven white behavior for many generations.
We like the spices, sort of.
They're frightening. They're frightening, but you like them.
Yes.
And I think that the people of Iowa, we're recapitulating that moment of history now. I think that, you know, we don't want to pretend that it's perfect here.
No, no.
You know, we don't want to pretend that nobody ever feels weird here or that you never get like really weird questions.
Right, right.
But I think that the fact that there is not a tradition of violence, that there's not a tradition of withholding opportunity, and that there is active welcoming of people of color happening in Iowa is important to know. This is a historically very white state because of the settlement patterns that Mike has talked about here. But that doesn't mean that there can't be a new wave. And if you're a person of color, you're someone who wants to be part of a community that has more people of color, this could be that place. You just got to come in, see if the wind drives you crazy or not. Mike, thanks for coming and talking with us about this.
Thank you.
Folks, thanks for watching and thanks for joining us. AR has recently passed a milestone. We've reached more than 100,000 people in America with detailed local climate information, and it's thanks to the incredible support of the AR community. There are so many folks committing their financial resources, their energy, their time to helping this information get out there. I'm so grateful to all of you, and I'm so glad that we're doing this together. Thanks for being there with me. I'm going to keep an eye on the news. I'm going to keep an eye on high consensus science. I'm going to try and get you what you need as we go through this together.